Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This is about how Fox News is fake news. The very word news is the definition of fake news when it's in Fox News's name. So what is news? News is information that is new, usually relating to current affairs, to also politics, sports, scientific breakthroughs, things in the arts, entertainment, things of that nature. So Fox News is a propaganda channel. That doesn't mean that everything it says is bogus. Propaganda can be true, but it's selective truth. It's selecting to flatter a certain side and selecting to denigrate the other. So it's what you exclude is as important as you include. There are questions of emphasis and of certain connotations, choosing particular words to reflect badly here and there. Which guests you choose to interview and the style in which you interview them, things like that, where you report things as fact or where you report them as opinion, and so forth. So there's a synergy between Fox News, and it certainly has a worldview, and the Grand Old Party, or to be more exact, the Trump administration. It might as well be a telefanzine for Donald J. Trump, who's the antithesis of the Fox worldview, really, when you look at it, because they're supposed to be about family values, personal responsibility, morality, telling the truth, paying your debt, fiscal conservatism, patriotism, serving in the military, not shirking, not profaning, and on and on. And obviously he violates so many of their rules. So he makes an absolute mockery of their moral code, yet they're still absolutely subservient, always kowtowing to him. So it's full of telebimbos, and I use that word advisedly. A good-looking young woman who's a journalist, she should not be demeaned. But if you pick someone who is ravishing, but she's got not much between the ears, doesn't really have what it takes to be a journalist, just because she's got a pretty face, yeah, that is a telebimbo. And if these daytime programs, dressing in these sheer, short dresses, well, there's a reason for that, because sex sells. They're using their sex appeal. And I don't object to it. I find it very alluring to see some eye candy. The men don't really seem to meet up to that. So Trump can leverage support from Fox News. They are absolutely loyal. There are a few exceptions who do ask him some worthwhile questions, though, such as Wallace. So there's uncritical coverage from Fox News. It's fawning. Now, they do tell some lies, claiming there's a witch hunt where an awful lot of witches have been convicted or pled guilty. So there's clearly not a witch hunt, and they keep peddling that outrageous lie or broadcasting the proven fallacy that Obama was not born in the United States or was not an American citizen like Trump did. And you see Sean Hannity appearing in Trump advertisements. So the Hannity repeating Trump slogans with evident approval, coming on stage at his rally to campaign with him, gushing about Trump. He's just bubbling over with enthusiasm for him. If he wants to be a full-time employee of the Republican National Committee or the Trump Organization or the White House, fine. But no, he's paid by Fox News. So it is just beyond ridiculous how partisan he is. They're saying that polls do not count. The polls have been accurate. They're not only bang on accurate, depends which poll you look at. There is a margin of error. They say that up to 2% either way. Accurate in 2016, accurate in 2018. But empirical evidence does not count for Fox News people unless, of course, it happens to support the case that they wish to make. So they mention the military service of Republican candidates, but not of their Democratic opponents. So anti-intellectualism, blind faith, these are the things that inform, or rather misinform, much of the Fox News viewership. It's about closed-mindedness. In fairness, you get some of that amongst liberal people and left-wing people too. But with Fox News viewers, it seems to be off the chart. Not in every case. So the long-term problems for Fox News and the GOP more generally, that they rely on whites, particularly elderly whites, elderly wealthy whites, church-going, gun-owning, things like that. Whites, as a proportion of the population, are falling. Obviously, elderly people are dying off. Now, people might become Republicans as they get older. That is not happening at a sufficient rate to replace the people who are dying off. Church attendance is down. Gun nuttery is not as popular as it was. Now, it's much too early to write their political obituary, but you think they're going to have to change their pitch. They're going to have to detoxify their brand and appeal to a wider pool of people. They had some success with Hispanics in the last 2 decades. So InfoWars folded not long ago when they were no longer given a platform. So more of those sort of people will watch Fox News. So they will be having to appeal those sort of people by going off the scale in terms of wacko conspiracy theories. So Fox is a pox on the American mind. Why do people find it so alluring? Well, it's fast-moving, there's slick presentation, they're dressed up to the nines, it's exciting, it's infotainment. And they never let you get bored because they're always moving on quickly. Sensationalist, creating this idea of urgency or a sense of crisis. And there's always heightened emotion, and they definitely have an opinion on it. So there's never a dull moment, you've got to say that for it. It's always very emotionally charged, and they focus on the most dramatic stories, focus on crime, the military, combat, foreign affairs, especially if it's moments of dispute and crisis, nations in conflict, even not armed conflict, disagreement, things like abortion, God, gun, gays, God, gays, guns. These are the staples of Republican rhetoric. So things which are mundane, but actually more important in a sense, socioeconomic issues, low wages, the environment, the lack of access to healthcare, the rising cost of college, the cost of living generally, things like that, automation of jobs and job creation. These topics seem banal by comparison. They require lengthier reports and coverage which is more in-depth, more analytical, and that would be beyond the attention span of many viewers. But in the long run, these less dramatic issues, these sort of Cinderella subjects, are the ones which are probably going to impact people's lives more. So these are weak areas for the GOP, so Fox avoids them. They seem to think there is no loyal opposition when their man's in the White House. Criticism of Trump is somehow illegitimate. They don't actually call it for to be criminalized, though, but they seem to think it's sedition in all but name. Certainly didn't think so when Obama was in the White House. They were unsure of Trump when he was an insurgent. He started out as an outlier within the party, but then when he became their nominee, he moved to centre stage and they put their impetus behind him, and they think they might be able to get over the line in 2020. So they're scornful of science and reason in general. They obviously disbelieve in climate change. They think that terrorism is sheer malevolence. It sometimes is. And there's nothing to be addressed behind it. Obviously, they tend not to focus on white supremacist terrorism, on attacks on Muslims, things like that, or that guns have nothing to do with gun attacks. A bit like Iran having nuclear weapons, that would have nothing to do with the nuclear war, would it? So they defend inherited wealth and privilege. By the way, I don't disagree with them completely. I'm not completely opposed to people inheriting wealth. The privilege is conferred on people, the super rich, they have the smart lawyers, accountants, lobbyists to move their money around, to label their money something else, to pay minimal tax, and tax cuts for the billionaires, pushing the tax burden onto the working class, many of whom are Fox News dupes. So they're dismissive of unwelcome evidence such as polls and any hard data, and in fairness, that attitude could be found amongst their opponents too. They're very moralistic. They've got this moral high tone against abortion and pornography and so on. And actually, I tend to share their great distaste for abortion. But if money is to be worshipped, if wealth is virtue, why would you object to people making money out of pornography or anything, or drugs for that matter? So Trump is no paragon of virtue, but you won't hear much criticism of him for that. They exalt toughness as the supreme virtue. Toughness, obviously, in their case, often means inhumanity, if we're to be more accurate. They rail against big government while demanding it. Big military, big CIA, big FBI, big prisons. No government official can be trusted. Well, they could, of course, in the old days. They were very pro-law enforcement, pro the military, but now that the FBI are investigating their hero, the FBI are absolutely a nest of vipers. We can't trust government officials, except, of course, when, on their word, we lock people up without trial in Guantanamo Bay for 15 years. No rights for them, no fair trial for them. Non-citizens have no rights because we're the master race. Well, that's the way Fox News would have us think. So they started this steady drumbeat of war for a war against Iran. For those of us who recall 2003, it's horribly familiar. By the way, I supported and still support the liberation of Iraq in 2003. But the reasons they were to liberate that country, to ensure there were no WMD, do not pertain to Iran. But that's another video. They're very irrational. They don't seem to see the middle ground. They think that honourable compromise doesn't exist. They want capitulation by the other side. I remember Bob Dole, Republican candidate in '96, saying that honourable compromise is necessary and protects us from absolutism. But Fox would not appear to agree. They want logical absolutism, or perhaps it would be illogical absolutism. Build up that wall, yeah? So Trump wants to shut down the government. He boasted about it. So it is on his head. He will be responsible for this. I know it's actually Congress has the power of the purse, not the president. But he could try to persuade Republicans. He holds a lot of sway with Republicans in Congress to pass this new budget, but they won't do it because the Democrats don't want to give a cent to the border wall. And even if you are a Trumpster, why should you pay a cent for the border wall? Because you were promised by your idol, Trump, you wouldn't have to pay a penny. Mexico was going to pay every last peso, which was a flagrant lie. And who would have been stupid enough to believe that? Well, obviously tens of billions of people. So Trump, even judged in his own terms, has no business calling for the US taxpayer to pay anything towards that border wall. So budget hawks, they get away with it. Paul Ryan, who managed to double the deficit in 4 years. I know it wasn't him alone. Okay, he was Speaker of the House, but he shepherded through a lot of these tax cuts for the super wealthy, which led to a massively increased deficit, which he had sworn to reduce. So it's true that the deficit increased under Obama, but not as fast as this. And he was obviously trying to get the economy back on track and succeeded marvelously. And it wasn't about making tax cuts for the people who were already filthy rich. So Fox doesn't really do constructive criticism, only destructive criticism. Seems to view everything as a zero-sum game. And some of their political opponents would have the same attitude, which is equally reprehensible. So they're very confrontational, Fox News. And they're very sycophantic towards people they exalt, such as Trump. And they feed his totalitarian tendencies. They're always utterly pliant towards him. He calls him up for his rambles, unburdening himself, and Dookie appears to be playing father confessor to Trump when Trump gives us a word salad. Just his senile dementia couldn't be clearer when he's rabbiting away with all his twaddle on Fox News, getting things off his chest. So they ask him no worthwhile questions. They never challenge him, put him on the spot. That's what a journalist worth his salt would do. So the audience appear to be increasingly numb to this extreme partisanship. And this one-sidedness is just absurd. You don't see it on any other channel. They may have a slant, but it's just that. It's a slant. It's not being flagrantly partisan. So the thing that might actually do well for Trump is scandal fatigue. It's just become normalized. There has been scandal after scandal after scandal. It's just been so much that people just get bored, rigid with it, and just stop listening. They've been saturated with scandal, with vulgarity, and they just can't absorb it anymore. They've been desensitized to his expletive-laden rants, and they think that that casting aspersions on the integrity of the judiciary and law enforcement, that is normal, that's somehow acceptable now. So that's one of the things which might just get Trump over the line next time. Well, I think it will, unfortunately. It remains to be seen.